Okay everyone, welcome back. We're about to begin week 2, and this video is intended to just very briefly introduce you to the Civil War era and get you thinking about why that period is so important in the history of American capitalism. In the week ahead, we're going to read 8 short primary source documents that were created during the 1860s and 1870s, and we're going to discuss those in our group forums. So let's get to it. There are some obvious truths that we all probably understand about the Civil War. That, for example, it was fought between two sides with different economic systems. On the one side, the Union, the North, you have a free labor system. Sometimes people emphasize that the North was industrial, that there was a lot of manufacturing there. That's true, but it was still mostly an agricultural society. Farms were fairly small, worked by families who owned them, and a few laborers who worked for wages, as workers did in factories. On the other side, of course, is the Confederacy, the southern states that had seceded in 1860 and 1861. Their system was based on slave labor. The most powerful people in the Confederacy, those who led the secession movement, were owners of large plantations that grew important cash crops, especially cotton. Plantation workers were enslaved African Americans. Again, I think we all probably understand the basics of this conflict. For many years, historians saw the differences between North and South as differences between capitalism in the North and something else in the South. Some people called it feudalism, or paternalism, or agrarianism, but whatever it was not capitalism. And they believed this because they saw wage labor as the critical component of any capitalist system. This belief led historians to claim, for instance, that the Northern victory was a triumph of American capitalism. Historians don't really accept this conclusion anymore. In recent years, scholars have emphasized that enslaved people were not only valuable to their owners as a source of labor, but also as a source of property and wealth. That is, enslaved people were themselves the most important commodity in the Southern economy. They were bought and sold as investments through a market in slaves that spread across the South. They were often purchased on credit. Owners went into debt in order to finance the purchase of slaves. Their bodies were insured against injury and loss, and their work was quantified carefully by accountants in order to measure their value to owners. I include these details to emphasize the point that Southern slavery was a capitalist system, albeit one that functioned differently than capitalism in the North or in Europe. Recall that Jürgen Koga's definition of capitalism emphasized commodification, that is, measuring things by their price. He also emphasized investment with the hope of future gains, and markets as the mechanism of allocating and coordinating resources and exchange. Each of these was essential to the slave system. But if the Civil War wasn't a triumph of capitalism, it was definitely a revolution in American capitalism. It was definitely a moment of enormous change. The documents we're going to read this week tell us about different aspects of this change. We're going to read about the Republican Party's economic and social vision for the country. This is important because the Republican Party controlled the federal government for most of the years between 1860, when Abraham Lincoln was elected, and the 1930s, when the Great Depression set in. The party definitely changed during those years, but the Civil War era was the moment when they could turn their founding priorities and ideas into law. We're also going to read about how victorious Unionists defined or understood the idea of free labor, how businessmen understood their place in national politics, and how freed people, the formerly enslaved, pursued their economic goals. Finally, broadly, We're going to think about what this revolution in capitalism actually entailed. What was changing? What was significant about those changes? Next week, we will read an article by a historian that addresses some of these questions. For now, though, I hope you enjoy reading the primary documents. Please make sure you give them a couple hours of your time and have 2 or 3 discussion questions posted in your group forum by Tuesday morning, September 4th at 10 a.m. Also, keep in mind that in the future, discussion questions will be due on Monday evenings, but I wanted to give you a little extra time because of the holiday weekend. And remember to respond to group questions by Wednesday, September 5th at 5 p.m., and then respond again to your group members' contributions by Thursday, September 6th.